Many of us libertarians cheered the demise of the Trans-Texas corridor that Governor Perry has been promoting. And just in time for Obama's bullet train. Good grief. But I'm a realist. I understand we're living in a time when most people are accustomed to and maybe even comfortable with a broader scope of government involvement than many of us libertarians would prefer. So I want a realistic answer to this next question. No pie in the sky libertarian ideals. If you're elected, you'll be working with an entrenched political class in Austin. So what can you realistically do to move away from bloated public works type transportation projects or so-called privatizing that is really just handouts to politically connected cronies and get to a true free market type transportation solutions for Texas? On this question, we start with Ms. Youngblood.
Well, God was able to create the world in 6 days because He was starting from scratch. In Texas and everywhere else, you start with a transportation system. If we started 100 years ago, we might have private roads. It could have been done. You could pay a toll to a private individual, a matter of contract, and I think that would have worked a lot better. But we're entrenched in this, and I don't think we're getting away from it. I totally agree that public-private partnerships are the worst of both worlds. It's just the way that the rich and powerful become more rich and powerful. And the roads that they create, the public doesn't want. There's no demand for them. And I think that's a problem with a lot of projects. I think we should change the way this is done, get more local say, more local input into how roads are built and maintained, because a lot of these roads, there's really no demand for them. How to fund them? The gasoline tax. Much of that money to Washington. We need to find a way to keep it here. Instead of sending it to them, they take their cut and send some of it back to us, however that works. We need to keep it here and use that to fund roads. I'm against all of these ridiculous things like bullet trains and all those things, because we have the happy train in Houston. It goes back and forth and nobody rides it. Some people run into it periodically with their car. You can never hear it coming. It's so quiet and environmentally friendly. But that's just an example of things people don't want it. And I think that's how we've got to approach this. Make sure there's local input, a clear demand, and a clear need for something, then fund it through gasoline taxes. And then if the gasoline taxes aren't enough, then that's when you stop the road building.
Well, I would like to think, as a Marine First Sergeant, that I could go in there and call every one of those commissioners into my office, line them up, and run a charge sheet on them and give them some NJP. However, I know I can't do that. I would also like to get the state out of most of our departments. Let's put an end to them. Completely dissolve them or privatize them. However, I don't know that I can do that reasonably right now either. But for now, the responsibility lays with me as the governor. I must ensure that I am accountable to the people when making my appointments. This goes for all appointments, not just in the transportation department. Second, it requires the 5 appointees as commissioners to be accountable and held accountable at the Department of Transportation. They should be liable for any mismanagement that occurs within their department, and they should have to apply for their jobs to start with. I must work with the Senate to ensure a non-biased appointment and removal system is adhered to. A strong, nonpartisan governor should lead by example and demand the same from the Senate. Finally, I must reach out to the citizens on a consistent basis. The governor should insist the public scrutinize the department and provide feedback to their senators, to me, and through the media. The information on contracts is out there and it is accessible. It only requires the public to get involved, and as governor, I will ask for that. Thank you.
Well, I believe to start out with, you have to understand how big the problem is. Over the next 20 years, in today's dollars, we're going to need $315 billion for our road needs. That's one heck of a shortfall for what we're at right now. We're just not going to make it. One of the problems we have is that we're spending money out of our system to other programs we don't need to. For example, TxDOT has a budget in which they spend $150,000 to the Lufkin Tourism Board. You know, how good is that? I don't know how many roads get built in Lufkin, but I don't think the Tourism Board has anything to do with it. As mentioned earlier, we have a federal gas tax, which we only get about 70 cents on the dollar back from the federal government. That's not realistic. We need to get those numbers up. We need to look for practical solutions, as Paul asked. What's a practical way for us to get there? And as a strong libertarian candidate, we need to be leaders and show people that we have practical ways to get there. We're going to ask the state to spend money where they say they're going to spend it. We're not going to be looking to Lufkin to figure out how to get tourism up. We're not going to be sending people on European trips to see how mass transit systems work. We're going to stay here in Texas. We're going to build roads. We need to look at it. Currently, you might not realize this, but we have a constitutional amendment that asks about 25% of our sales tax, our gas tax, goes to schools. So maybe we need to go back and revisit a few things and see where the money is really being spent. You might be familiar with, probably 20 years ago now when the lottery came into place and the money was supposed to go to schools. Very little of that money makes its way into schools. Again, it's honesty, it's transparency. I know those words are a little bit hard to take these days, but that's what we honestly need at this point. We need a government that says they're going to spend a dollar somewhere, and that's where it gets spent. Thank you.
First, I would refuse federal monies for transportation projects and seek legislation to curtail the acceptance of such funds by local governments. Second, I would veto any new state transportation projects and any state funding for transportation projects undertaken by local governments. Third, I would work to sunset the state transportation bureaucracy. The legislature might not be willing to end it entirely, we have to realize that, but reducing it should be feasible given the state of the economy and the precarious situation that we find ourselves in economically. Fourth, I would work for a ban on eminent domain. Politicians and bureaucrats have no more right to take private property against the will of its owners than a private citizen would have. Fifth, I would work to reduce and hopefully eliminate the barriers toward free market approaches to transportation at all levels of government. Now, over the last 4 decades, there has been an increasing concern for the environment. All too often, that concern has led to calls for an increased role in our lives for government. But big government is not healthy for the environment and other living things. Massive highway boondoggles, besides being a huge transfer of wealth from the average citizen to the petroleum and construction industries, also make difficult the development and implementation of more environmentally friendly private approaches to the free movement of both goods and services. I intend to end those boondoggles so that the private sector can take up the slack and perform in a way that is more friendly to the environment and certainly more friendly to the taxpayer.